What happens when a seasoned British television veteran with decades of experience comes face to face with one of America's most outspoken and controversial daytime talk show hosts? What unfolds is not just a tense interview, but one of the most explosive and emotionally charged confrontations ever witnessed on live television. This is the kind of moment that leaves studio audiences stunned into silence and viewers at home glued to their screens, unsure whether to keep watching or change the channel. And at the center of it all were Denise Welch and Joy Behar. Denise Welch, widely respected in the UK for her no-nonsense attitude, candid honesty, and fearless commentary, had been invited onto The View to discuss something deeply personal and profoundly important to her: her ongoing work in mental health advocacy. For years, Denise had been open about her own struggles, using her platform to break down stigma and encourage open conversations around depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. What was meant to be a thoughtful, empathetic discussion quickly spiraled into a war of words that no one in the studio seemed prepared for. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable clash, moments like these are exactly why live television remains so unpredictable. One sharp question, one misunderstood tone, and everything can explode in real time. And this particular morning at The View was anything but ordinary. The day began like countless others at the show's New York studios. Bright lights, bustling producers, hosts reviewing cue cards, and guests taking their seats with polite smiles. Denise had flown in from Manchester specifically for this appearance, energized and hopeful. She had done her homework, studied the show's format, and believed she was stepping into a supportive environment where her message would resonate with an American audience. Her publicist had assured her this would be a positive platform, an opportunity to amplify awareness and inspire viewers. But almost immediately, something felt off. During the commercial break before the segment began, Denise noticed an unusual tension among the hosts. The typical light-hearted banter felt forced, almost mechanical. Joy Behar sat silently shuffling through her notes with an intensity that stood out, her brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. The other hosts exchanged subtle glances, clearly sensing the unease. Whoopi Goldberg attempted to ease the mood with a casual joke about British accents, but even that failed to land. The laughter was thin, and the air felt heavy. When the cameras rolled again, the shift was unmistakable. Joy didn't ease into the conversation. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on Denise, and launched straight into her first question. Though her words were polite on the surface, her tone carried an edge that Denise hadn't expected, especially given their brief, cordial pre-show exchange. "So, Denise," Joy began, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "you've been very vocal about mental health issues. But some critics argue that when celebrities talk about depression and anxiety, it's just another way to stay relevant. How do you respond to that?" The question hit Denise like a cold splash of water. This wasn't curiosity. It wasn't compassion. It was confrontation. For a brief moment, the studio seemed to hold its breath. Denise was visibly caught off guard. This was not the supportive platform she had been promised. Still, drawing on years of live television experience, she straightened her posture and kept her composure. "Well, Joy," Denise replied calmly, though her British accent grew stronger as her emotions surfaced, "I think that's quite a cynical way to look at it. When someone like myself speaks openly about mental health struggles, it's not about relevance. It's about removing stigma. It's about helping people who are suffering in silence realize they're not alone." Joy nodded slowly, but her expression suggested skepticism rather than understanding. "But don't you think?" Joy pressed on, "There's a difference between genuine advocacy and what some might call performative activism. You are promoting a book. You're on a publicity tour." The tension in the studio intensified. One of the co-hosts shifted in her seat. Sarah Haynes attempted to interject with a more supportive question, but Joy raised her hand, signaling she wasn't finished. The interruption only added fuel to the growing discomfort. Denise's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, but I have to push back on that," Denise said firmly, her voice steady but unmistakably charged. "I've been talking about mental health long before I had any book to promote. I've spoken openly about my struggles for over a decade. often at great personal cost, because I believe transparency saves lives," the audience murmured softly. Joy leaned back slightly, repeating Denise's words with pointed emphasis. "Bipolar disorder," she said slowly, stressing each syllable. The way she said it caused an audible reaction in the room. Denise's eyes flashed. "Yes," she replied, unwavering. "Bipolar disorder, a real condition, one that millions of people live with every day. And if someone in their living room feels seen because I've spoken honestly about it, then this conversation matters, whether I'm promoting a book or not." At that moment, it was clear this interview had crossed a line. What began as a discussion about mental health had become a clash of values, perspectives, and television styles. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, aware they were witnessing something raw and unscripted. The producers behind the scenes scrambled, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. Live television had once again revealed its most volatile side, and there was no turning back. "That's quite convenient, isn't it?" Joy said, her tone light but edged with skepticism. "These days, everyone seems to have some sort of mental health diagnosis. Whatever happened to just having a bad day?" The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. The studio, usually filled with murmurs, reactions, and the soft hum of conversation, fell into an uneasy silence. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something had shifted. A few exchanged glances behind their lenses, instinctively tightening their grips as if bracing for impact. This wasn't just another heated talk show exchange. Something was about to go very wrong. Denise Welch's jaw tightened. For a brief moment she said nothing at all. Her eyes flickered downward, then back up at Joy, calculating. Viewers later said it looked like she was deciding whether to walk off the set entirely or stay seated and fight back. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, slower, and far more dangerous than shouting. "Convenient," Denise repeated, emphasizing every syllable. "Joy, are you seriously suggesting that my mental health struggles were convenient?" Joy shifted slightly in her chair, but didn't interrupt. "Are you saying that years of therapy," Denise continued, "years of medication, sleepless nights, panic attacks, and genuine fear for my own safety were just what? Some sort of publicity stunt? A phase? A fashionable excuse?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Joy realized, perhaps too late, that she had crossed a line, but instead of pulling back, she did what seasoned talk show veterans sometimes do when cornered. She doubled down. "I'm just saying," Joy replied, folding her hands together, "that in my generation, we didn't run to therapists every time life got tough. We dealt with our problems privately. We didn't label every struggle." Denise's composure cracked instantly. "Your generation also swept everything under the carpet and pretended it didn't exist," she shot back. "How many people suffered in silence because of that attitude? How many people drank themselves into oblivion? How many people took their own lives because they were too ashamed to ask for help?" The tension in the studio was now palpable. You could almost feel it pressing against the walls. Audience members sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing an important conversation or a complete meltdown. Social media teams backstage were already scrambling, fingers flying across keyboards. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, sensing the moment slipping out of control. "I think what Joy is trying to say," she began carefully, her voice calm, practiced. "No, Whoopi," Denise cut in sharply, turning her head without breaking eye contact with Joy. "I know exactly what Joy is trying to say, and frankly, it's dangerous." Joy raised her eyebrows, clearly irritated. "This kind of dismissive attitude toward mental health," Denise continued, her voice rising now, "is exactly why we still have such a crisis in this country and around the world. Crisis might be a strong word," Joy replied coolly, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. "Maybe what we actually have is a generation that's been coddled into thinking every emotion needs to be analyzed and medicated." That was the moment everything changed. Denise's face flushed red. She leaned forward abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She pointed directly at Joy, her hand trembling, not with fear, but with fury. "Are you out of your mind?" Denise exploded. Her voice echoed through the studio, so loud and forceful that several crew members looked up from their equipment in alarm. One producer could be seen gesturing wildly from behind the cameras. "A generation that's been coddled," Denise continued, "Joy, do you have any idea how ignorant you sound right now?" Joy's eyes widened. In all her years on The View, very few guests had ever confronted her so directly, so unapologetically. She straightened in her seat, clearly caught off guard. "Excuse me," Joy stammered. "I think you need to calm down and remember where you are. Where I am." Denise laughed bitterly, shaking her head in disbelief. "I'm sitting across from someone who just trivialized the suffering of millions of people on national television." The studio was completely silent now. "Someone who thinks depression and anxiety are fashionable trends," Denise went on, "rather than legitimate medical conditions that destroy lives, families, and futures." The other co-hosts remained frozen, eyes darting between the two women. No one seemed brave enough to jump in. The producers in the control room were frantically signaling, "Cut to commercial, stay live, intervene, don't intervene." But nobody could agree on what to do. The moment had become too explosive, too raw. "Now hold on just a minute." Joy snapped, her own temper finally flaring. "I never said depression wasn't real. I'm talking about overdiagnosis, the rush to label every difficult emotion as a disorder." Denise scoffed. "Oh, so now you're a medical expert," she fired back. Gasps rippled through the audience. "You're not a psychiatrist, Joy." Denise continued. "You're not a therapist. You're not the one sitting with people at their lowest point, listening to them say they don't want to wake up tomorrow. So maybe, just maybe, you should think twice before dismissing something that you clearly don't understand." The studio lights felt hotter. The silence felt heavier, and in that moment it was clear to everyone watching. This wasn't just television anymore. It was a collision of generations, values, and deeply personal pain, unfolding live, with no script and no easy way out. "Tell me something, Joy," Denise said sharply, her eyes locked onto her across the table. "What medical school did you attend? What psychiatric training do you have that qualifies you to decide who is genuinely suffering and who isn't?" Joy's face flushed a deep shade of red. She was clearly not accustomed to being challenged so directly, certainly not by a guest. For decades, she had been the one asking the questions, steering the conversation, controlling the narrative. Now, for the first time in a long while, she was on the defensive. "I don't need medical training to have an opinion," Joy snapped. "This is a talk show. We discuss things, discuss things." Denise repeated incredulously, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You're not discussing anything, Joy. You're spreading dangerous misinformation." The audience stirred uneasily. "You're perpetuating exactly the kind of stigma that keeps people from seeking help," Denise continued. "The kind that convinces them they're weak, dramatic, or exaggerating their pain. The kind that tells them they should just toughen up instead of reaching out before it's too late." For a brief moment, it looked as though someone else might finally step in. Sarah Haynes leaned forward, clasping her hands together, trying desperately to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Maybe we can talk about the positive impact of mental health awareness campaigns," Sarah suggested cautiously. "About how open conversations have helped reduce stigma," but Joy wasn't ready to let it go. Something about Denise's passionate response had struck a nerve. Whether it was pride, control, or resentment, Joy's expression hardened. She leaned forward slightly, a condescending smile forming on her lips, the kind that suggested she believed she was about to land a decisive blow. "You know what I think," Joy said. "I think you British celebrities come over here and try to lecture us Americans about our problems, while you can't even sort out your own issues back home." The studio gasped audibly. Even Whoopi Goldberg, usually unflappable, looked stunned by the personal nature of the attack. The atmosphere shifted instantly. What had been a heated debate was now something far more uncomfortable, bordering on hostile. Denise sat back in her chair, momentarily silent. Her face went still, as if she were carefully processing what had just been said. "Did you just," she began slowly, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm, "did you just make this about nationality?" Joy shrugged slightly, clearly pleased with herself. "Are you seriously suggesting that mental health is somehow an American versus British issue?" Denise asked. "I'm suggesting," Joy replied smugly, "that maybe you should focus on your own country's problems before coming here to tell us how backwards we are." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience, quickly dying out. Denise stood up abruptly. Her chair rolled backward with a sharp screech against the floor. causing several crew members to look up in alarm. Security at the edge of the set instinctively stepped closer, uncertain whether intervention might soon be necessary. "You are absolutely unbelievable," Denise said, looking down at Joy, not just with anger but with unmistakable disappointment. "This isn't about countries," she continued. "It isn't about nationalism or politics or your petty culture. War nonsense. This is about human suffering, and you're turning it into some sort of twisted entertainment." Joy remained seated, but her posture had shifted. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her jaw clenched. She was feeling the heat now, even if she refused to admit it. "I'm not turning anything into entertainment," Joy shot back. "You're the one who came on this show promoting your book, and then got emotional when someone asked legitimate questions." "Legitimate questions?" Denise repeated, her voice rising again. "You called my mental health condition convenient. You dismissed an entire generation's struggle as being coddled. Nothing about what you said was legitimate. The studio felt like it was holding its breath." "You didn't question ideas," Denise went on. "You questioned people's pain, you mocked it, and you did it from a position of influence, knowing millions of people are watching." Whoopi finally raised her voice, her authority unmistakable. "Ladies, I need to stop this for a moment," she said firmly. "This conversation is clearly getting out of control." But even as Whoopi spoke, it was clear the damage had already been done. Social media feeds were exploding in real time. Producers were frantically whispering into headsets. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing an important reckoning or a complete breakdown of live television decorum. Denise took a deep breath, visibly trying to steady herself. "This isn't about winning an argument," she said more quietly now. "It's about responsibility. When you trivialize mental health, when you suggest people are exaggerating or seeking attention, you give permission for others to dismiss them too. And sometimes that dismissal costs lives." Joy looked away briefly, the first sign of uncertainty flickering across her face. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, charged with unresolved tension, regret, and the uncomfortable realization that this exchange would not be forgotten anytime soon. Whatever the producers decided next, commercial break or continued broadcast, one thing was already clear. This was no longer just a talk show debate. It was a public collision of ego, power, and deeply personal truth, played out live, with no script, no rewind, and no easy way to undo what had just been said. "I think we need to take a step back here," Whoopi Goldberg interjected carefully, sensing that the conversation had gone far beyond its original intent. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone trying to prevent a situation from spiraling completely out of control. But it was already too late. Denise Welch wasn't finished, not even close. Years of lived experience, years of advocacy, and years of pushing back against ignorance had brought her to this exact moment. She had reached her breaking point, and there was no turning back now. Her posture straightened, her eyes locked firmly onto Joy Behar, and her voice cut through the studio with unmistakable clarity. "No, Whoopi," Denise said firmly, "I'm sorry, but I'm not going to step back. Not when someone is sitting here spreading the exact kind of toxic attitudes that literally cost people their lives." The studio fell silent. Denise leaned forward slightly, her words now fueled by raw emotion rather than politeness. "Joy, do you have any idea how many people take their own lives because they're ashamed to admit they're struggling? Do you know how many families are destroyed because someone was too proud, too scared, or too stigmatized to ask for help?" A low murmur rippled through the audience. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was no longer a debate, it was a reckoning. Joy Behar visibly stiffened. For the first time since the segment began, she looked unsettled. She adjusted herself in her chair, glancing briefly toward the other hosts as if searching for backup. Her confident, almost dismissive demeanor from earlier had begun to crack. "Of course suicide is tragic." Joy responded defensively, her voice sharper now. "But that doesn't mean we can't have honest conversations about overmedication and overdiagnosis." The word honest barely left her mouth before Denise let out a short, humorless laugh. "Honest conversations, Denise repeated, shaking her head. There is absolutely nothing honest about what you're doing. She gestured broadly, no longer trying to soften her message. You're hiding behind the guise of just asking questions while actually reinforcing harmful stereotypes and outdated thinking that people have been fighting for decades to dismantle. That kind of rhetoric doesn't educate, it discourages. It silences people. The tension in the room was now unbearable. Even the live audience seemed frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a historic television moment or a complete and utter breakdown of daytime decorum. Cameras cut briefly to the co-hosts, some died, others visibly uncomfortable. Producers could be seen whispering urgently just off camera. Joy stood up. The movement was sudden and deliberate. She clearly refused to remain seated, while Denise towered over her emotionally and rhetorically. I've been doing this show for years, Joy snapped, her voice rising, and I've never had a guest speak to me this way. Denise didn't hesitate for even a second. Maybe that's the problem. She shot back instantly. Maybe if more people had the courage to challenge your outdated views, you wouldn't be sitting here in an ivory tower making pronouncements about things you clearly don't understand. The words landed like a slap. Joy's face flushed a deep red. Her composure, carefully cultivated over decades of television, crumbled in real time. She took a step toward Denise, her voice now loud enough to make several audience members visibly flinch. Ivory tower, Joy repeated sharply. You don't know anything about me or what I've been through in my life. Her voice trembled, not with sadness but with anger. And you don't know anything about mental health, she added forcefully. Denise fired back immediately, refusing to give an inch. The difference is, Denise said coldly, I'm not sitting here pretending to be an expert while undermining people who are genuinely suffering. Gasps echoed through the audience. Whoopi rose slightly from her seat now, clearly preparing to intervene more forcefully if needed. The producers' voices could be faintly heard through the earpieces of the hosts, urging them to regain control. But the confrontation had already reached its peak. Denise continued, her voice steady but cutting. I live with this, I advocate for this. I talk to people every single day who feel ashamed because of conversations exactly like this one, and I will not apologize for calling it out, especially on a platform with millions of viewers. Joy clenched her jaw, clearly struggling to respond. The sharp wit she was known for had abandoned her, replaced by visible frustration. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The audience, once unsure, now leaned in. This was no longer about Denise Welch or Joy Behar as individuals. It was about who gets to define mental health narratives in the media, and at what cost. As the segment abruptly cut to commercial, the atmosphere in the studio was electric. Viewers at home scrambled for their phones, already posting clips, reactions, and heated opinions online. In a matter of minutes, what had begun as a daytime interview had become a viral flashpoint in the ongoing conversation about mental health, media responsibility, and the price of speaking uncomfortable truths on live television. And when the cameras came back on, nothing about the view felt the same.